My name is Emily, and last Christmas I slid a cleaning rag across my parents' dining table toward my sister while she sobbed on the floor. Earlier, she was the star, bragging about her new Tesla and how exhausting it was to be the responsible one, while our parents laughed. I was doing what I had done my whole life, passing dishes, staying quiet, pretending it did not bother me that they still paid her rent in a city I could never afford when I was her age. Then my aunt asked one question about my work, and I finally told the truth. I said that a few months ago I had sold the company I built for $25 million. The room went silent so fast it felt like the power went out. My father set down his fork. My mother stared like I had confessed to a crime. My sister's smile froze, then cracked. She did not congratulate me. She stood up, started shaking, then dropped to her knees and burst into sobs, yelling that it was not fair, that I had stolen the life she was promised. In front of my parents, she demanded that I give her $15 million like it was the most obvious thing in the world, like I was just another account she could access. That was the moment I realized I was done being the invisible daughter. So I handed her the rag, looked her in the eye, and said softly, "My shoes are dirty. If you have ever watched a golden child melt down while the responsible one holds the family together, stay with me to the end. And if stories like this hit a little too close to home, consider subscribing so you do not miss what comes next." Growing up in our house, favoritism was not a theory, it was the air I breathed. I did not have the language for it as a kid, but I could feel the weight of it every time my family walked into a room together. My older sister was always positioned in front, and I learned early that my job was to stay a step behind and not make things harder. My older sister is Olivia Carter. Our parents are Linda and Robert, and from the very beginning it was obvious which daughter they saw when they closed their eyes and pictured the future. Olivia was treated like a long-term investment. Every spared dollar seemed to drift toward whatever might make her life smoother. When she wanted dance lessons, there was suddenly money for shoes and costumes and weekend drives to competitions. When I wanted to join a club that charged a small fee, I was reminded that budgets were tight and that I could always volunteer instead. None of this was said cruelly. It was just presented as obvious reality, the way the weather is obvious when you step outside. The pattern deepened with age. Report cards arrived and Olivia's average grades were celebrated with dinners out and photos for social media, while my higher marks were described as expected, something that did not need attention. If she forgot her lunch, someone left work to bring it to her. If I forgot mine, I was told it would teach me to plan ahead. On the surface, it looked like they were raising two independent daughters, but only one of us ever had a safety net. Money made the imbalance impossible to ignore. When Olivia turned 16, our parents found a used car and somehow pulled together the insurance, gas, and repairs. I watched the keys drop into her hand like a ceremony. A few months later, I asked if I could take an extra community art class, something cheap at the local center, and was immediately given a talk about earning things myself and not relying on handouts. I was 14, but it felt like I was being treated as an adult tenant who needed to justify every expense. I adapted the way quiet kids do. I stopped asking for small treats, stopped mentioning things I liked that cost money. I learned how to make old sneakers last another year, and how to say I was not hungry when what I really meant was that I did not want to be a burden. There is a particular kind of invisibility that comes from being told you are strong and capable in the same breath they use to explain why your sibling needs more help. It sounds like praise, but it lands like a sentence. By the time high school started, Olivia's path was lined with soft landings. She tried out hobbies and dropped them without consequence. Tickets were paid, lost textbooks replaced, surprise fees handled with quick transfers from our parents. I picked up a part-time job as soon as I legally could and funneled most of the pay into a savings account I guarded like a secret. No one suggested that I could relax or that mistakes would be covered. Responsibility was not just encouraged for me, it was assumed. Looking back, those years were not defined by one huge incident, but by 1,000 tiny decisions that all leaned in the same direction. When my sister stumbled, there were hands under her elbows. When I stumbled, the lesson was that I should have watched my footing. That was the quiet training that shaped both of us. By the time I finished high school, the way my family treated me and my sister had hardened into something permanent. College did not rewrite any of it. It just stretched the gap wider until it felt like two separate lives sharing a last name. When applications came around, Olivia talked about campuses in other states, while our parents encouraged every option and handled paperwork without mentioning money. My planning happened on the sidelines with a guidance counselor, a website, and a calculator. Community college was the only thing that made sense. I saw the tuition numbers, knew I would have to work almost full time if I wanted to keep studying, and accepted that no one was going to build a different plan for me. Those first semesters were a blur of early alarms and late nights. I took any shift I could get, bussing tables, restocking shelves, and cleaning offices after closing. During the day, I sat in class beside students who went home to dorms. What I did not expect was how much I liked the work itself. There was a calm in turning chaos into order, in seeing a messy space and breaking it into steps until it ran smoothly. I noticed inefficient systems everywhere, from the way managers built schedules to the way cleaning companies left paper forms for clients to sign. My hands would be busy with a mop or a tray while my mind rewrote the process. The idea for my company grew out of that constant low-level frustration. At one cleaning job, a supervisor tried to juggle double bookings and no shows using a paper calendar, scattered voicemails, and a cracked phone screen. Crews waited for last-minute texts. Families called to ask why no one had arrived, and everything depended on one exhausted person tracking scraps of information. I did not know anything about code, but I knew I was watching a system set up to fail the people doing the hardest work. On breaks, I started reading about basic programming and service businesses. In a cheap notebook, I sketched the outline of a platform that could handle bookings, schedules, and payments in one place, so cleaners and clients saw the same information without begging for updates. It felt ambitious, yet every time I tried to dismiss it as unrealistic, the idea came back. Getting from concept to something real was messy. I tried to describe my vision to a local company owner and stumbled through terms I barely understood. I spent nights watching tutorials until my eyes burned, downloaded tools, broke trial projects, wiped everything, and started over. None of it looked like progress from the outside. To my family, I was still just the daughter stacking jobs while my sister settled into what our parents called her first real apartment, rent covered by their transfers. When they turned to me, they praised my work ethic, but never asked what it was attached to. In their minds, I was the one who would always make things work without help. They did not see the nights I sat over a used laptop at the kitchen table, chasing errors I did not yet know how to fix. Slowly, the pieces began to connect. I moved from loose sketches to basic wireframes, then to a clumsy first version of a platform that technically functioned even if it was slow and ugly. A small local company agreed to test it for a week. When their schedule ran without a single double booking and every crew knew where to be without frantic calls, something shifted for me. It was not success. Not yet. But it was proof that my future did not have to match the story my family had written. Success did not crash into my life. It slipped in quietly. A few more companies asked to try the platform. Then there was a month when that income quietly passed every paycheck I had ever earned. I upgraded my laptop without panic and paid off the last of my college loans. For the first time, I could breathe without rehearsing which bill to ignore. What started as a side project demanded a real decision. I filed paperwork to form a company, rented a desk in a shared workspace, and cut back my cleaning shifts until the platform was my full-time job. It felt reckless to walk away from guaranteed wages, but it also felt honest. No one was going to step in if I fell, yet for once I was choosing my own risk instead of absorbing everyone else's. As more clients signed on, I realized this was bigger than my own rent. Small companies told me their days ran smoother, their crews spent less time waiting for instructions, their customers stopped calling in confusion. I watched usage numbers creep up on a screen and felt a mix of pride and disbelief that did not have anywhere to go. Inside my parents' house, I was still the reliable daughter who would figure things out. Outside it, strangers were starting to depend on something I had built from nothing. The email that changed everything looked almost boring. A firm that had heard about the platform through a client wanted to talk about a possible acquisition. I assumed it was a mistake until a quick search showed a serious investment group, the kind that usually funded companies I only saw in headlines. They were interested in code written at odd hours on a second-hand laptop at a kitchen table. The next months blurred into negotiation. I sat through long meetings, answered the same questions, watched lawyers underline phrases and send documents back covered in notes. More than once I was sure the deal would fall apart, but it kept moving forward. When the final agreement landed in my inbox and I saw the figure attached to it, the number was $25 million. I signed the papers in a quiet conference room with no toast and no audience, then walked out into an ordinary afternoon knowing my life had just been split into a before and an after. I did not tell my family. Keeping the news to myself was not about punishment, it was self-defense. For the first time, I owned something that was not tangled up in their expectations or emergencies. Weeks went by. Bills paid themselves. Savings grew. My parents asked the same surface questions about work they had always asked, and shifted quickly back to updates about my sister. Their disinterest stung, but it also made it easier to stay silent. By December, the contrast between the two versions of my life felt almost surreal. On Christmas Day, I carried food into my parents' house like every other year and took my usual seat at the table. Conversation circled around my sister's apartment, her car, her stress. No one in the room had any idea I had already signed away a company for more money than they would likely ever see. When a relative finally asked how my work was going and mentioned hearing that something big had happened, there was no way to keep both versions of my life standing. In one steady sentence, I told them about the sale, watched the room fall silent, and saw, on 3 different faces, 3 different versions of the same realization. I had built a future they never imagined for me, and they were furious that I had done it without them. After that holiday, the reaction did not fade. It settled around me like smoke that would not clear. The next morning, my phone lit up before I finished my first cup of coffee. I was not surprised to see my mother's name, but the frequency turned into a steady drumbeat. When I let the first calls ring out, voicemail icons stacked up. Her messages swung between injured confusion, moral lectures, and firm warnings about what happens to people who turn their backs on family. My sister chose a different tactic. Her messages arrived in short bursts, more accusation than conversation. She framed my success as something I owed to the competition she believed she had provided, as if the years of being overlooked were a training program she had designed for my benefit. In her version of the story, my work was not an independent achievement. It was a delayed reward for the supposed burden of growing up beside her. Keeping the money to myself became, in her mind, a kind of theft. Extended relatives who had not spoken to me in years suddenly remembered my number. They mentioned talks with my parents, said they understood I was under stress, and circled back to the suggestion that sharing a portion of the sale would prove I was not selfish. It was obvious where they had learned that language. I could feel a new story being built in real time, one where my parents were reasonable, and I was cold and ungrateful. The emotional pressure would have been enough on its own, but it did not stop there. A week later, an email from my bank appeared in my inbox with a subject line about unusual activity. I almost deleted it, assuming it was another generic warning, until I saw specific details. An application for a line of credit had been submitted using my information as guarantor. The bank had flagged inconsistencies in the signature and wanted confirmation before processing. My full legal name, address, and social security number sat on a form I had never seen. On the phone, the fraud department walked through the application. Payments were set to be withdrawn from an account that did not belong to me. The contact numbers matched the area where my parents lived. When the representative mentioned my parents' street as the listed address for notices, something inside me went still. This was not a stranger testing stolen data. Someone inside my own family had decided that if I would not hand over money, they would construct a way to reach for it anyway. As the bank dug deeper, more alerts surfaced. A second attempt tied to an auto loan linked to a high-end vehicle, an inquiry from a store card I had never applied for, traces of my identity being stretched in directions I had not authorized. Each notification felt like another cut across the steady life I had fought to build. I had spent years climbing out of early debt. Now the threat of being dragged back into someone else's obligations hovered over each account. Sitting at my kitchen table with printouts spread in front of me, the emotional part of all this dropped away, and something colder took its place. My parents had always expected me to absorb the impact of their choices. My sister had always assumed someone would clear the path in front of her. Now those patterns had crossed into something dangerous. I understood that if I did not draw a boundary backed by more than polite refusal, the story of my life would return to the same script, only with larger numbers and higher stakes. The next step could not be another call or another attempt to explain. It had to involve someone whose job was to treat this as serious as it was. The bank reports pushed me past the point where I could call this a normal family fight. Seeing my name and data inside applications I had never filled out flipped a switch I did not know I had. For most of my life, my instinct had been to absorb problems and work harder in silence. Looking at those forms, I understood that if I stayed quiet now, I was not being kind or loyal. I was volunteering to let other people rewrite my future. I handled it the way I would handle a broken process at work. I asked the bank for copies of every suspicious document and kept them in a plain folder. My signature stared back at me in lines that did not match my hand. The contact address pointed to my parents' neighborhood, not mine. Details I guarded closely had been placed into boxes as if my identity were a family account. On the surface, I sent emails, joined calls, and met deadlines. Underneath, my attention kept sliding back to the folder. Sleep broke into restless stretches. I woke with my heart racing and a sense that if I did not act, I would end up carrying debts I had never agreed to. My usual strategy of being understanding and quiet had become part of the problem. Through a contact in the tech world, I found an attorney named Monica Reyes and made an appointment. Sitting in her waiting room, I felt a wave of guilt that had nothing to do with the facts. Years of hearing that problems stayed inside the family left me half convinced I was doing something wrong by asking for help. In Monica's office, I laid out the sequence as clearly as I could. I described the accounts I had opened, the ones I had not, the alerts from the bank, and the documents with my information and someone else's handwriting. She listened, took notes, and kept her questions practical. From her point of view, this was not a puzzle about gratitude. It was misuse of my identity that could damage my credit and tie my name to someone else's obligations. Her advice was direct. Lock down my information, put alerts on my credit, notify institutions in writing, and keep records in case we moved toward a civil case. Walking out with a list of actions made the situation feel less like a nightmare and more like a problem I was allowed to address. Legal steps alone did not untangle the knot in my chest. I found a therapist, Dr. Allen, because I could feel how deep the roots of this went. In his office, I began to say things I had never said out loud. I admitted that I measured my worth by how useful I was, that I felt selfish whenever I considered saying no, that a part of me believed I owed my family unlimited access because they had once paid the bills. Hearing those beliefs in my own voice made them sound smaller and less permanent. They were not laws, just old stories I had been taught. At the same time, I worked with a financial advisor named Greg Patel to pull the numbers into a clear picture. We went back through years of statements, marking transfers that had covered my sister's rent, payments that lined up with her car, small loans that had vanished. Laid out in order, the pattern stopped looking like random generosity and started looking like a long habit of treating my effort as a shared resource. By the time the alerts were filed, the letters mailed, and the timeline finished, I no longer felt like a difficult daughter causing trouble. I felt like an adult recognizing that her life did not exist for other people to spend. The formal meeting with my family in a downtown conference room felt nothing like going home. There was no food or small talk, just a long table, neutral walls, and a stack of documents in front of me. Sitting beside attorney Monica Reyes, I understood this was not a conversation about who was hurt. It was about what my name had been used for without my permission. My parents sat across from me with my sister, Olivia, and her husband, Ethan Cole. They looked shaken, but I could still see the old certainty that they could steer the outcome if they pushed hard enough. Their lawyer tried to set a calm tone, yet the air felt heavy. For the first time in my life, a discussion involving my family would be governed by rules that did not bend around their feelings. Monica laid out the evidence in a simple line. Bank alerts, credit reports, and application forms all showed my personal information paired with my parents' address. Device data tied the submissions to their town. Dates matched the weeks after Christmas. There was no need for interpretation. Someone had used my identity to chase credit and loans, assuming either that I would never see it or that I would quietly pay for whatever they opened. Their attorney wrapped it in softer language. He talked about stress, confusion, and parents who had always stepped in financially now struggling to understand new boundaries. Listening to him, I realized I had spent my entire life hearing that same melody. It had always been the explanation for why my sister's wants outranked my needs. The difference now was that the story met a paper trail that did not care about birth order or guilt. When he finished, Monica presented a proposal that was firm without being dramatic. Every fraudulent or unauthorized account using my information would be taken out of my name and placed fully in theirs. They would accept legal and financial responsibility for the balances and for any investigation. A written statement would correct the narrative they had spread, making clear that I had never agreed to share the proceeds of my company. Going forward, they would be barred from contacting banks, lenders, or advisors about my finances or using my data for any purpose. Silence followed. I watched the understanding land on my father as he read each line. Years of avoiding hard choices had led him to a point where there was nothing left to dodge. My mother's anger flickered, but even she seemed to recognize that refusing would invite deeper scrutiny and a public record they could not manage. Olivia looked cornered, less disturbed by the misuse itself than by the idea of losing access to the lifestyle she believed she was owed. They signed because the alternative was worse for them, not because they suddenly respected my boundaries. Still, seeing their own names on the agreement mattered. Those signatures tied them, not me, to the debts and to the false story they had told. Walking out of that building, I did not feel triumphant. I felt like someone who had finally stepped out of a role she had never agreed to play. Over the next few months, the impact showed up quietly. The Tesla my parents had helped Olivia secure vanished from her parking spot, and a modest used car appeared instead. Without steady transfers, the rent on her upscale apartment collapsed her budget, and she moved to a smaller place farther out. My parents sold a vacation timeshare, cut back on hosting, and stopped bragging about the help they gave their children. Relatives who had repeated the ungrateful daughter's story grew quiet after reading the statement Monica had required. I chose distance and kept it. Calls and messages were blocked, group threads left, family events ignored. Holidays turned from something I braced for into days I could plan around my own life. I put my time into growing what I had built, into therapy, and into mentoring people who reminded me of the younger version of myself, the ones still being told that being capable meant carrying everyone else. Looking back, I do not see this as a story about money destroying a family. The money just stripped away the excuses. The favoritism, entitlement, and casual use of my effort were always there. The difference was that I finally refused to turn my future into a safety net for people who would not stand on their own. If there is any value in what I went through, it is this: love without respect is control, and loyalty without choice is a cage. Protecting what you have built does not make you cruel. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to walk away, let people live with the cost of their own decisions, and finally claim your life as your own.